Dylan asked me straight out after my mom's funeral. So, how much did your mother leave you? I was shocked. He didn't even bother to say a kind word or show any sympathy. He probably thought the inheritance was already in my bank account since he saw me with the bank book. That's just wrong, I thought to myself. Still, I told him, it's about $5 million. $5 million? That's it. Dylan said with a smug grin that made me feel uneasy. Even after taxes, you'll have hundreds of thousands left. I didn't like how he reacted. His sneaky smile gave me a bad feeling. I didn't know what he was up to, but I knew he wasn't going to get his way. The very next day, he started putting his plan into action, but his foolishness was going to ruin him. He just didn't see it coming. My name is Ashley Green. I got married at 20 through an arranged marriage to Dylan. He's 4 years older than me and works for a company. Dylan is the eldest son of the Owen family. His younger brother, Gabriel, moved out after college and cut ties with the family, so Dylan was treated as an only child and spoiled by his parents. To be honest, I didn't want to marry Dylan. But my mother came from a family with a long-running business, and I wasn't in a position to say no to my parents' decision. Dylan didn't want to refuse either, because his father was in business too. Our marriage wasn't built on love. It wasn't a happy one. To make things worse, we couldn't have kids. Since we married so young, it was hard to accept that we couldn't have children. I thought having a child might bring us closer, but even after going to the hospital, it didn't happen. After a few years, my in-laws, who used to treat me kindly, started calling me names. Hey, barren woman, are the chores done? They would say. It hurt so much. They acted like it was all my fault, as if I wasn't trying hard enough to make it happen. My father-in-law used to say mean things to me every day, like how going to the hospital was a waste of money. But Dylan never stood up for me. While I was being scolded by my in-laws, he'd either read the newspaper or nap, snoring away. When I said I wanted to work to get out of the house, he refused. If you go to work, people will think we're struggling, he said. Back then, it was normal for women to stay home after marriage, but living with my mother-in-law was a daily nightmare. No one helped me. I couldn't tell my parents because I didn't want to worry them, and I couldn't leave because our marriage was tied to work. I kept telling myself things would get better someday, so I endured it all. But nothing ever changed. After 20 years of marriage, when I was 45, my father-in-law died in an accident. That's when we found out his company had been avoiding taxes. The fines and back taxes drained our savings. Our property was taken, and the company went bankrupt. We kept the house, but our comfortable life was over. I thought it would be hard for Dylan, who was 47, to find a new job, but my parents helped him get one quickly. My mother-in-law, on the other hand, became a shell of herself. She aged fast and stopped saying mean things, which was a relief. But then she had a stroke and needed full-time care. By then, I had already given up on having kids. I was 45 and had been slowly letting go of the hope, but caring for her sealed it. Dylan didn't even try to help. He left everything to me, even on his days off. He'd just lounge around like before. One day, I worked up the courage to ask him, Dylan, can you help with your mom's care sometimes? Maybe on your days off, or even for one meal? He frowned and said, I work, you know. Let me rest on my days off. He just didn't understand. I didn't have days off. I was exhausted. After his father's company went under, my parents started worrying about me. They told me to come back home. But I couldn't abandon his mother, even after all the bad things she'd said to me. We had a caretaker come once a week, but there was no money to hire someone full-time. I felt stuck. Even though I was treated badly, I just couldn't bring myself to leave her behind. I just couldn't bring myself to leave. Over time, Dylan started leaving the house early, even on his days off. He said he couldn't relax at home anymore. I later heard from the neighbors that he was telling people, my wife doesn't even let me rest at home. Meanwhile, they all knew his mother needed care, and they knew he was leaving everything to me. It was clear Dylan didn't care how this looked to others. It was heartbreaking to see his mother, who had loved him so much, being ignored by him once she got sick. Sometimes she'd say, Dylan doesn't come because you're here. But when I asked, should I leave then, she'd just go quiet. This routine went on for another 20 years. It finally ended when my mother-in-law passed away, reuniting with her husband. By then, I was almost 63. I had no love left for Dylan, but I had learned to accept how things were. Leaving didn't feel like an option, so I thought I'd spend the rest of my life in this house. Dylan was good at his job, and his company noticed. Even after reaching retirement age, they asked him to keep working as senior staff. Because of this, I could live comfortably. We were never close, but I appreciated that he never tried to throw me out. Maybe he thought it was too late for that now. Dylan still spends most of his days off outside, which gives me time to enjoy being alone. I've even picked up pottery as a hobby. For the first time since getting married, I've made friends and started enjoying my days. But this seemed to bother Dylan. "You're out playing while I'm working," he said one day. Then he burned my bag. I used the bag for my pottery class. He set it on fire in the yard, along with my pottery tools and a pouch I kept inside. "What are you doing?" I yelled. "Don't waste time on weird hobbies. Just do the housework," he replied. By the time I poured water on the fire, it was too late. Everything had turned to ashes. I was furious. I thought it was too late to change anything, but I realized I still had a lot of life ahead of me. The word divorce crossed my mind. But just as I started thinking about it, tragedy struck. My parents passed away suddenly. First my father from an illness, and then my mother, who fell sick shortly after his funeral. Everything happened so quickly, and I was overwhelmed with sadness. My brother Elijah had already taken over our father's company, and with all the people attending both my father's and then my mother's funerals, I ended up bedridden for about 2 weeks. It felt like my mind and body just shut down from exhaustion. My friends from pottery class were kind enough to check on me, but Dylan made fun of me. "How long are you going to stay in bed?" "I was tired after your mom's funeral too, but I didn't sleep that much." "Must be nice to sleep all you want without working." Maybe he had a point, but hearing that from my husband hurt deeply. The next day, I forced myself to get up and return to my daily chores. I couldn't afford to enjoy hobbies anymore. My life became just the bare minimum, but Dylan didn't seem to care as long as I kept going. Sometime after my mother's funeral, I remembered I had to handle the payment to the funeral home. Elijah was busy with work, so I had promised to take care of it for him. I pulled out the bank book to check the balance. That's when Dylan noticed and came over with a sly smile. "So, how much was your mother's inheritance?" he asked. I was shocked. He said this so casually, right after my mother's funeral, without showing any concern for me. He must have assumed the inheritance had already been deposited because he saw me with the bank book. It was such a heartless thing to say. I replied flatly, "About $5 million. $5 million? That's it," he said, grinning smugly. "Well, even after taxes, there should still be hundreds of thousands left." His attitude disgusted me. I didn't know what he was planning, but I knew things wouldn't go the way he wanted. Without another word, I quietly put the bank book away. Sensing the mood, Dylan awkwardly added, "Well, you've had a tough time. You should rest early tonight." It was unusual for him to say something nice, but it didn't make me feel better. It made me feel worse. I didn't want to see him anymore that day, so I went to bed early. The next morning seemed normal. Dylan had breakfast and left for work as usual. But later that day, I got a call saying he hadn't shown up at his workplace. That had never happened before, and I started to worry that he might have been in an accident. I tried calling him, but his phone was off. Pacing around the house in confusion, I went into the living room, and then I saw it. On the table was a piece of paper. It was a divorce form, already filled out and signed by Dylan. When I saw the divorce papers, I immediately thought, "No way," and went to check the spot where I had left the bank book the day before. Just as I suspected, it was gone. "Unbelievable," I muttered with a sigh. This wasn't an accident. Dylan had clearly taken it and disappeared on purpose. I had noticed him acting strange in the living room that morning. By taking the bank book, it was obvious he was planning to start a new life without me. It all made sense now. Dylan had stuck around all these years because he was waiting for my parents' inheritance. The missing bank book was proof of his intentions. But instead of panicking, I stayed calm. There was no need to rush. I filled out the divorce papers myself and took them to the city office. Dylan had set himself up for failure, and I was determined to make sure he realized there was no going back. I also called Dylan's workplace and said, I can't reach him either, but it doesn't seem like an accident. I'll let you know if I hear from him. Sorry for the trouble. They were understanding and said they'd mark it as a paid leave for the day. I couldn't help but feel a bit jealous. He was lucky to work at such a kind company, one that my parents had helped him get into. But now his connection to me was over. Submitting the divorce papers felt surprisingly easy, considering everything I'd been through. For the first time, I was free. I couldn't help but wonder how different my life might have been if I had left him sooner. As I started packing my belongings, my phone rang. It was Dylan. After ignoring my calls all day, he was finally trying to contact me. I knew exactly what he was going to say, so I ignored it and continued packing. But the phone kept ringing. Then even the house phone started buzzing. Annoyed, I finally answered. Hello, I said, sounding casual. Sure enough, Dylan's panicked voice came through the line. I can't withdraw the money, he shouted. I couldn't help but laugh. Oh, so you finally figured it out, I said, amused. He must have been in such a hurry when he stole the bank book that he didn't think things through. My ID. Where's my ID? He demanded. You don't remember? I said, still laughing. It was in the bag I used for pottery class. What? Dylan stammered, sounding desperate. And that ID? It's expired, I added. Expired? He exclaimed. Yes, I said calmly. After my mom passed, I told you over and over to help take care of the paperwork. But you didn't listen. I even went to the bank to update everything, but since I'm not the account holder, they wouldn't let me do anything. So, the bank book? It's useless. There's only a few dollars in there. Don't mess with me, he shouted. But I just laughed. It was his mess, not mine. You need to organize things properly for someone who's no longer here, I told Dylan. You said you'd handle it eventually, so remember that. Don't blame me. Dylan snapped. Then what am I supposed to do with this bank book? I replied calmly. What can you do? Unless the paperwork is updated, there's nothing you can do with it. Dylan kept complaining, but I didn't feel like responding anymore, so I stayed silent. He must have gotten impatient because I heard him talking to the bank teller again, explaining, I accidentally burned the ID. Isn't there anything you can do? Maybe by proxy? Look, I'm on the phone with my wife right now. It seemed he put me on speaker because I could hear the teller's hesitant voice. I couldn't help but speak up. Dylan, what are you even talking about? You can't do anything as a stranger, and you know that. Oh, by the way, the divorce papers were processed just now. Thanks for filling them out. Bye. I hung up after saying what I wanted. I'm pretty sure the bank teller heard my parting words, and I could imagine Dylan's face, either pale with shock or red with anger. The thought made me laugh. I knew I had to leave the house before he came back. Quickly, I packed my belongings and left. My destination was my family's old home, which had been empty since my parents passed. I had inherited it, along with some of my mother's assets. Her company assets totaled $250 million, but I chose to only inherit $5 million in cash, just enough to live comfortably. I didn't want Dylan to find out about the full amount, especially since we had no children. The rest of the inheritance included the family home, my mother's beautifully preserved dresses, and my father's antiques. These heirlooms were worth a lot if appraised. My brother Elijah and I had agreed on this arrangement. Since Elijah had moved out after getting married and taken over the family business, he was happy to inherit the cash while I took care of the family home. Our inheritance discussions went smoothly. After I arrived at the house, I called Elijah and told him I had divorced Dylan and would be living there. He sounded relieved. If you're going to live in the family home, it won't be empty anymore. That's good. But are you really okay with divorcing Dylan, Ashley's? Yes, I said firmly. We have no children and both our parents are gone. If we both want a divorce, it's the right choice. I want to start over, and I don't regret it. Elijah was still worried about me being alone, but I reassured him. Living with Dylan and being treated like his servant for the rest of my life would have been far worse. Now I finally had the chance to live life on my own terms. If I could spend the rest of my life in this house, where I had so many memories with my family, even if I was alone, I would feel truly happy. Dylan kept calling me again and again, but he didn't seem to realize I was staying at the family home. He never showed up. That first day alone, I felt at peace. The house was quiet without my family, but I felt a deep sense of relief. The next day, I finally had the energy to go deposit some money at the bank. Since Dylan still had the bank book, I knew retrieving it might be a bit tricky. I decided to return to the house early in the morning, around 7 a.m., hoping Dylan would be asleep. When I opened the front door, the smell of alcohol hit me right away. I winced at the stench. In the living room, I found beer cans scattered everywhere. On the table was my bank book, torn into pieces. I stared at it in disbelief. How could someone do this? Destroying someone's bank book out of anger was just wrong. I carefully picked up the torn pieces, put them in my bag, grabbed a few clothes, and went back to the family home. After that, I headed straight to the bank to sort things out. As I reached the entrance, I heard someone call my name. Ashley. It was Dylan. He had been waiting for me. I noticed the bank book was gone, so I figured you'd come here, he said. Whether I come here or not is none of your business, I replied sharply. Don't say that. We've been together for so long, he said, trying to act casual, even though the divorce was finalized. I ignored him and walked into the bank. Dylan kept trying to talk to me, but I refused to respond. That's when something unexpected happened. Brother, isn't that Ashley? Someone called out. We both turned to see Gabriel, Dylan's younger brother. Gabriel? What are you doing here? Dylan asked, clearly surprised. It was rare to see Gabriel. In the 45 years I had been married to Dylan, I had only met Gabriel a handful of times, usually at funerals. He had distanced himself from the family, but their parents had insisted he at least attend major events for the sake of appearances. Gabriel explained, I'm here about Mom's inheritance. I thought I'd check the balance and update you both. Dylan's eyes lit up at the mention of money. I was shocked too. I had assumed the account had just a few dollars left. But according to Gabriel, there were also long-forgotten investment trusts and safety deposit boxes rented during their father's lifetime. Gabriel had heard about the inheritance from their mother before she passed away. She had sent him a message saying, if something happens, you take care of it. But because of his busy life, it had taken him a long time to act. Gabriel looked at me and Dylan with an apologetic expression. There was a letter in the safety deposit box along with some jewelry. Mom said all her estate should go to Ashley. What? I was shocked, but Dylan looked even more stunned. Gabriel pulled out the letter from the documents he had with him. I immediately recognized the stationery. I had bought it for my mother-in-law. The letter clearly stated that all the jewelry in the safety deposit box and her other assets were to go to me, her daughter-in-law, Ashley. I could imagine her writing it carefully. I remembered asking her once if she needed help writing anything, but she had brushed me off, saying, it has nothing to do with you. Maybe this is what she was working on back then. I covered my mouth in surprise. Ashley, you've been taking care of everything all by yourself, haven't you? Gabriel said. Despite all the harsh things my mother-in-law had said to me, she must have felt sorry and trusted me to handle her estate. She probably knew Dylan wouldn't handle it fairly. Next to me, Dylan's face turned red. He started trembling but said nothing. Gabriel, who didn't know about our divorce, continued casually, I never planned to inherit anything myself, but since you're the legal heir, Dylan, it's just a matter of transferring everything to Ashley. That shouldn't be a problem, right? I was then called to the bank counter to handle the paperwork. Dylan just sat in the lobby, looking defeated, and didn't even try to follow me. I completed the process to reissue the bank book and made the payment for the funeral home. I'll get going now, Ashley. I'll be in touch, Gabriel said before leaving Dylan and me at the bank. Later, Gabriel contacted me to explain what had happened after he left. Dylan had protested, saying, that letter isn't valid, but Gabriel calmly told him, we should respect Mom's wishes. Still unsatisfied, Dylan insisted on seeing a lawyer. The lawyer confirmed that the letter wasn't legally binding as a will, but suggested it would be cheaper to settle things through discussion rather than a legal battle. Reluctantly, Dylan agreed. He kept the house, but he gave up on the investment trusts, which weren't worth much, and the jewelry. Finally, I formally inherited my mother-in-law's estate. Dylan still argued, saying, if Ashley gets my mom's estate, then I should get what her mother left her. But the lawyer shut him down, explaining that was a separate matter. It was embarrassing. Dylan even got scolded by the lawyer for being unreasonable. Unable to let it go, Dylan tracked me down at my family home and showed up at my doorstep, looking furious. I was wrong. Let's start over, Dylan begged, kneeling at my doorstep. He realized he wasn't going to get anything and now wanted reconciliation. Start over? I said, finally letting out the feelings I had held in for years. There was never any love between us in the first place. What is there to start over? For the first time, I felt free to speak my mind. Dylan went silent, and for a moment, it seemed like he truly regretted his actions. I couldn't help but smile. At least you still have the house, right? Have you contacted your workplace? If you're so desperate for money, you'd better work hard and not lose your job, I said firmly. Then I closed the door. It was finally over. The assets left by our mothers, along with my inheritance, meant I could live comfortably from now on. Dylan, however, didn't take my advice. He kept skipping work and didn't inform his workplace, which eventually led to his dismissal. I had warned him. Without his job, what did he have left? It made me wonder if his dedication to work had only been about keeping up appearances. Now, with no one to impress and no easy money coming his way, it seemed like he had lost his sense of purpose. Though I had spent years with him, I didn't feel responsible for helping him. That chapter of my life was closed. I'm truly sorry for all the trouble Dylan caused you, Ashley. It's regrettable, Gabriel said when he called me. He was the only one in the family who ever apologized. He also reassured me that I didn't need to deal with Dylan anymore. Gabriel had recognized the family's issues long ago and left home early. Now, he was probably living a happy, peaceful life, free from all that drama. Meanwhile, Dylan had become a recluse. At least he had his pension to live on. While I appreciated Dylan's attempt to start over, I believed he should focus on starting over on his own. I went back to my pottery classes, and my friends were thrilled to see me again. I hadn't realized how much joy I could find in spending time for myself. At the class, I even met someone wonderful. Although I had sworn off marriage, being with someone who truly cared for me started to feel like another form of happiness. Maybe I didn't need to be alone forever. It might seem too late for a fresh start, but just like with the divorce, it's never too late as long as you're alive. Anyone, no matter their age, can find happiness. I truly believe that.